Is it time to change our story about Worcester? It's June the 29th, 2018, and this is 508 to show about Worcester. Our panel today is pop cultural journalist Kayti Burt, Brendan Melican, and me, Michael Benedetti. Brendan, can you turn the lights on while I'm talking here? Today we're talking about the 1924 Worcester Klan Meeting Riot and freshening up the stories that we tell ourselves. Brent crude oil is $79 a barrel, up 5% on the week. Bitcoin is $5,400, down 4% on the week. And you are listening to Unity Radio, 102.9 FM in Worcester. You can call in live at 508-471-5265. And thanks to the mighty Gabrielle Powers for engineering today's show. Now I'm talking directly into the mic. Hi, guys.
How's it going, Mike?
It's going good. How are you doing, Kayti Burt?
I'm pretty good.
So, Kayti, a lot of people know you because you've appeared on the show before, but a lot of people don't know you. You're writing for Den of Geek these days?
I am. I write about television and books and movies and internet culture online. And
you travel around the world in pursuit of these stories, right? Like you were just at the Austin ATX Television Festival?
Yes, I was in Austin for a TV festival that I've gone to several times before. I was also at BookCon in New York City. So Worcester is my home, but I get to go to a lot of cool places and spend some time with some interesting people.
Well, and coming up at you're going to be at San Diego Comic-Con moderating a panel whose we cannot identify yet publicly the show this panel is about, but it's one of your favorite shows.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a mind blower. Think about that, Brendan. Just to think about like when The Wire was on, if somebody was like, "Hey, do you want to moderate like a panel with the showrunners and actors of The Wire for an hour?"
I think about stuff like this all the time. Pretty much every time I see Katy down at the bean counter, I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, wow, like I'm actually hanging out with somebody who gets to do the kind of cool stuff that most people only dream of, and I'm just sitting right here, just kind of being part of Worcester.
I feel that way when I come on your radio show. I'm just like, get to do the cool stuff.
Well, obviously, but yeah, no, I mean, the stuff that you do is pretty amazing, though.
Yeah,
especially
I have a very
if you're
cool
into
job.
Yeah, cool stuff. You're standing on my cord, though. That's not cool.
Well, you know, I'm always interested in narrative because I feel like one of the strengths of this show is our ability to talk about Worcester as though it were a TV show rather than a reality. And it's, reality is a good reference point at times. But
a lot of us have our fingers crossed that it is just a poorly scripted TV show.
Well, I wanted to talk about two things, I guess, two story-related things this week. One is related to the Worcester Renaissance, and one is related to the 1924 Worcester Klan Meeting and Riot. Relating to the Worcester Renaissance, I think one of these last week's shows, it occurred to me that the Worcester Renaissance is not a great framing anymore for talking about the city. It's just kind of played out.
It's a terrible word to begin with. I think it's used so much, it's starting to become like the Worcester version of moist. It's just a word that nobody wants to hear except for the person who's saying it.
When was so if this is the rebirth of Worcester, or if that's how we're framing it, when was like the first?
That was after the second settlement was burned to the ground.
I really think of the first. I mean, speaking of the Klan riot, like that time in around the turn of the century into the 20s and 30s was when the population of Worcester was going out of control, was just booming year after year. We're possibly have more people now than we did then, or at least we're heading that direction, but it's been taking decades to get back to where we were at our peak population.
And I think it is important to point out, too, that when you look at the Commonwealth overall, much of the land that is now occupied by human beings previously was just farmland and uninhabitable for a variety of reasons, right? So if you look at the Commonwealth's overall population of 7 million people or whatever we're at now, and let's assume that like Worcester County never turned into sprawling suburbs, all of those people would be contained inside of Worcester, right? So, but that's in a make-believe land that never actually existed. If we're able to grow our population while the Commonwealth continues to have a stable population and most of the suburbs surrounding us continue to grow as well, that's actually a really awesome sign that, one, we're turning back the clock on flight from cities into suburban areas, and two, that it's not just like a retraction of people coming back in from the suburbs.
So for many years in public policy decisions and discussions around people's lives in Worcester, it has been useful to frame things in terms of a Worcester Renaissance. Like, is a Worcester Renaissance going to happen? Is a Worcester Renaissance happening? Is this Renaissance good or bad for the city in various ways? If we're going to characterize the Renaissance as basically meaning putting a lot of money into real estate development in the city. The Worcester Renaissance has happened.
Sure.
Like it probably has plenty of negative effects. There's plenty of negative trade-offs, but it's not like we have like a giant like nuclear waste dump in the middle of the city. So in that sense, the Worcester Renaissance is actually good, or good enough to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of feel like it's a plot. Why we need to figure out what's the next framing. And I'll give you an example from television, and then Katy Burt, maybe you have some ideas. You ever see the show Friday Night Lights?
Of course.
So, in Friday Night Lights, season 1, Jason Street's injury, huge part of that show. Him getting injured, him recovering. Have you guys seen Friday Night Lights?
You should watch it.
Katie actually has been watching Friday Night Lights for a long time, and this is why it's kind of a joke when I say, has she seen Friday Night Lights? She's like the expert of Friday Night Lights. But, like this football player's injury is like the inciting incident of the show. It's a big part of season 1. It's a big part of season 2, I think. And then it becomes less of a thing, and occasionally this injured football player kind of pops his head up, and you're like, oh, that guy, it's great to have him back. But it's not like every season of the show is like, oh, yeah, Jason Street in his wheelchair. We still need to spend like half the show on this. Because at some point you're like, I get it. There's other stories we can tell about Dillon, Texas. There's more useful ways that we can explore Dillon, Texas. Like, that was a great subplot, and it's great to still be in touch with Jason Street, but like you can't just do every year about Jason Street, man. And that's where I feel like we are with the Worcester Renaissance. Like,
we need something else.
Let's not ban the term Worcester Renaissance. Let's not look down on people using the term Worcester Renaissance. But let's just make it like a really minor subplot.
So what's going to be next? What's season 2 going to be?
I don't know. What kinds of things would you like to have? Well, so
how about this? Worcester, it's wicked moist.
Well, Brendan,
we'll workshop that.
Brendan, I will tell you that if we assume that the current series, Worcester, Massachusetts, started with the European settlement of a previously settled area, then we're finishing up season 145 and we're finishing up season 345 and we're going into season 346.
All right.
So the question for you, Katy Burt, what would you like to see in 346?
It's a big question.
Like if you were one of the showrunners of Worcester.
Well, not to talk too much about Friday Night Lights, but,
if you don't talk about Friday Night Lights, Brendan's going to talk about Star Wars. So
I'm okay
please.
with that, too. One of the things that show does really well is, you talk about how this Jason Street character is a really important character in the first episode and drives kind of the plot, something that happens to him moving forward. But that show is very much from the beginning a community show that recognizes that this place means different things to different people and is treated in different ways.
Sure.
Or they're treated in different ways by the community based on, class, race, gender, whatever, and age. And I think, for season 346 of Worcester, the TV show, just thinking more about like whose Renaissance is it, if we're still, using that phrase, and recognizing that different people relate to it in different ways, and just trying to like broaden the lens.
So you want this to be like a big diversity thing? This is going to be like the all-woman Ghostbusters, the all-woman Ocean 13. It's going to be all-woman Worcester?
I want it to be an ensemble. I want it to, in pop culture in general, in Western pop culture and American pop culture, we tend to have these like chosen one narratives over and over and over again. And like the superhero genre is like this too, where it's just always this like usually white man who is saving the day in some way, or a group of white men. But yeah, like getting away from that, I think like a really cool evolution in both storytelling and how we like frame our own narratives about ourselves and our communities would just, to think more about it as a community and not just about like these are the important people, but whose stories are we missing, and how do they feel about this thing that we're not even asking them about, or I don't know.
You're expecting me to have something to say. I concur.
You concur. I feel like whenever we're talking about plot lines in Worcester, we're usually not talking about the individual plot line. Occasionally when you have a character, a fan favorite like a Mike Gaffney or Gary Rosen, it becomes all about them. But usually you're talking about groups of people, maybe a building of people, maybe a club of people. So I feel like we really need to identify maybe like a group of mostly women, or a club of mostly women, or something that a group of women are involved with or connected with, and follow that story.
Yeah, whose stories are missing from
Yeah, well, a lot of people's stories.
a lot of people's stories?
We can't tell them all. I mean, we got a limited amount of screen time. We got 365 and a quarter days.
do we? It's already season 300 or 346.
Well, I'm just saying, in the season we have a limited amount of screen time.
Okay.
You know, we got to stay in touch with people like the city manager.
Yeah.
We got to stay in touch with people like the Snow Ghost, and God bless him, we got to keep Gary Rosen in there. He's a fan favorite. A lot of people keep. I mean, he's the one who's on the T-shirts.
I think that's kind of sometimes that's the best approach, right? Is you throw the audience for the loop and you take out. Who was the producer writer team that was famous for that? It was actually folks involved. Was it the folks who did Buffy?
Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
Was it? It was Josh. Josh, yeah.
Oh,
'cause
killing off.
Killing off the most favorite character. I mean, I think that's what you got to do. Sometimes
we are not encouraging anyone to kill Gary Rosen.
I mean, make them go away. Maybe you can just remove them from the storyline.
He's gonna go on a vacation.
What's that?
Gary's gonna go on a vacation for a year.
A long vacation. That's all.
And he'll come back fresher than ever.
Yeah,
it's gonna be cool.
Will he?
It's gonna be cool. We are fixing to head to a break.
You look like you're fixing to watch TV. What do you got going on with there, Mike?
This is 508, Worcester's voice of West Texas football. We'll be back in a minute with more.
I wasn't threatening Gary's life. Come on, that's ridiculous. But that's a good sunset a character, and you sunset the character that you're least
that's where
likely
the conversation
to.
was going to. I like that. You can kill off the fan favorite character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it always opens up the possibility to bring them back later as well too. I think it's funny too because that's always been. I think that's been the biggest fear for folks who got into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and they did it a little bit, but not. And at the beginning, every once in a while they would do that, but not not as harsh as they did. I think like in the Buffy days. But like as seasons come to a close, it's like fans go into a panic that like Joss is going to kill our favorite character. It's always going to be Coulson or it's going to be Agent May or somebody or whatnot. But I think there's value and that's how you keep people engaged. This person's on the ropes.
Didn't that dude already die in the Avengers?
Who?
Agent Coulson?
You haven't been watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Come on, Mike. It really has turned into one of the better things on TV.
Have you watched Cloak and Dagger?
I watched the pilot. I haven't been able to keep up with it
What
yet.
did you think of it?
Flip a coin.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I feel like all of the, with the exception of Daredevil, I kind of felt the same way about all the Defender shows. But to the point where I haven't even bothered on season 2s.
I haven't watched even season 1s of most of the Marvel Netflix shows.
Yeah, I just don't know. They were weird. I don't know. They were, but not weird in like, oh, well, you crazy kids today. It was just the way they decided to package the stories didn't make a ton of sense to me. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., man, you should get into that.
I'm not that into.
Maybe skip the first
I used to be interested in.
Which is terrible.
It's really bad.
But I think I still stand my
it's
ground
really
that it
good.
makes a lot of sense though. That like if they were
waiting for Captain America.
You guys have about a minute before you
Okay.
Thank you. That's also, I think, one of the genius things from my perspective that he did was recognize that, like, the movies that are coming out today, the kids who are going to be most eager, barring present company, eager to see those, were like single digits when they came out.
Yeah.
They opened up this universe that was so approachable and easy for families to get around, being like primetime television.
And then realize that that audience was not maybe
super into it, so they had to tweak it a little bit.
And it
Right
got
out
a
of the
lot,
gate, like, oh my god, this is actually kind of smart.
I think it's some of the best science fiction television.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friday night, you're going to be challenged like you have never been challenged before. The question flying around town is, can the Dillon Panthers be beat? Do we have the resources they have? Do we have the booster dollars they have? The experience they have? No, we don't. Are we playing on their field? Yes, we are. However, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Preparation, preparation, preparation. We're going to stack our strengths up against their weaknesses. Let me tell you something, Brendan. While the Dillon Panthers over on the west side are preparing for their Thanksgiving feast, getting their little fancy soirees together, dreaming about their playoff win, their state championship title, by God, we're going to be on this field right here, physically and mentally, preparing for one thing and one thing only, and that is beating the Dillon Panthers. Now listen to me, listen to me. You look around at each other right now, you look at each other, and you ask yourselves, gentlemen, because it is time, what kind of a man am I? Because Friday night, there will be a bond formed between and among you that will never be broken. I will not be proven wrong on that. Do I think we can beat the Dillon Panthers? I don't think we can beat the Dillon Panthers. I know damn well we can beat the Dillon Panthers. The question is, do you think we can beat the Dillon Panthers?
Is that rhetorical?
Then show me. This is 508 with Brendan Milliken, Kayti Burt, and me, Mike Benedetti.
You know what that reminds me of, Mike?
What's that?
Is, unfortunately it was Joe Rogan who introduced me to this idea, but it actually turns out it's completely true. Did you know that in Texas there are more tigers in captivity than there are alive in the wild?
We've talked about this on the show multiple times.
Well, maybe it's because you brought up Friday Night Lights in the past.
Well, I did not know that.
Yeah, more tigers in captivity in Texas.
Do you know what that number is?
High. It's a high number.
It's like 1 million tigers
It's
in Texas.
a lot of tigers in Texas.
Where are they?
Yeah, that's the question. But, it's a question you don't really need
Texas
to...
is big.
Yeah, Texas is big, but I think it's also an important cultural thing to point out, too, that we do need Texas. I think up here we poke a lot of fun at Texas. And
we mess with Texas, to coin a phrase.
We do mess with Texas, and I think we should stop doing that sometimes.
Because they have tigers.
That's part of it, yeah.
So the question I want to ask you... The question I want to ask you, Brendan Milliken, is, do you want to talk about the 1924 Klan riot, or do you want to talk about the WRTA ridership statistics?
Oh my! I definitely. Please spare me and go into Klan riots. Yes.
Okay, so I am so ready to talk about the. Can you just keep clicking the right?
Well, you're looking for
there?
that. Funny thing. Yesterday I was driving by the family past the newish WRTA building, and my wife, she was actually driving. I was just a passenger in the car, and slowed down as driving by. And she's like, "Wow, that really is such a beautiful building." It struck me that, again, timing being everything, I managed to just blurt out, "Yeah, it's great that they built such a fantastic facility right before they're about to shutter the doors for a lack of funding." But it is a really nice building they got down there.
What building is that?
The WRTA building down by there's a Crompton Park there.
Oh, okay.
The newish building.
I never saw that building.
You should take a walk down there. It's gorgeous.
Am I looking for something in particular, or am I just setting a mood?
You'll know when you get it. You'll know when you get it. So I want to talk about this thing that we've mentioned before, but we haven't really talked a lot about before, which is the 1924 Klan Meeting Riot in Worcester.
All right.
So I'm going to read something that I have written about this.
I think it's just important that we frame this for listeners too, because or viewers.
Oh, I'm going to frame this.
I know you are, but that might be part of the problem. That we have talked about this quite a bit in the past, and we've I think both agreed that we're just kind of making stuff up, and as it should be in Worcester.
No more.
But I think we need to.
Do I think I know something about the 1924 Klan riots? I don't think I do. I know something.
I just wanted to prepare all the listeners and viewers for amateur historian Mike Benedetti is now putting forth his thesis, but we're not actually. This has not been peer reviewed. This may be just another example of us making stuff up in a convincing way.
Well, and I want to encourage you to. So here we go. Klansmen beaten in street, cars stoned, women injured. I want to encourage you both to just interrupt me as the spirit moves you, because otherwise I could read this for a long time. Klansmen beaten in streets, cars stoned, women injured. Thus read the front page of the Worcester Telegram, October 19th, 1924. There was a KKK in Worcester, and a weird one. It's worth explaining how the Worcester Klan ended up being a half-Swedish organization that directed its hatred towards the Irish and Italians, not blacks. The first version of the KKK, or First Klan, was a racist terrorist group formed in the wake of the Civil War. It died out in the 1880s. Then in 1915, the smash hit pro-Klan film Birth of a Nation inspired the rebirth of the movement, the Second Klan.
Which is not a very good film. But
I think Birth of a Nation is a great movie. I mean, I'm not into it politically, and I think that Griffith was very naive. But he invented a lot of iconography, which the Klan then adopted, like the hoods and things. He just was like...
He also invented just a lot of film language
language and techniques, isn't it? But I don't know. There's just... This one doesn't stand the test of time. It's like having a hard time watching season 1 of The Wire, right? Or at least with somebody who's younger, much younger, and trying to introduce it to them, because as soon as the pagers start coming out, it doesn't make... You lose them. It doesn't make any sense. There's too much... Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Or maybe it's not worth debating because, It's a garbage film in
It's a
other
garbage
ways.
film in other ways.
Well, after this birth of the nation, rebirth of the Klan, it really took off in 1920 when it adopted aspects of multi-level marketing, with some Klan recruiters getting rich and Klansmen buying lots of crap from the national organization like helmets and even robes, because DIY Klan gear was frowned upon. Nobody was making any money on it. If you just put on a pillowcase over your head, you had to buy some money from the people in Atlanta. Buy some stuff from the people in Atlanta. The KKK had a whole menu of hatred to choose from, whether anti-Mormon, anti-Semitic, anti-black, anti-immigrant, or anti-Catholic. Worcester Klansmen were especially interested in these last two, anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. A boom in immigration from Catholic areas like Ireland and Italy was putting pressure on the labor market. And we were just talking about different voices in Worcester. Immigrants were a huge part of Worcester in the 1920s when only 70% of the population was native-born. Klan membership was a way to push back. And the Worcester Klan was a little more upscale than you might think, consisting of many fewer unskilled and menial workers and many more semi-skilled and skilled workers than Worcester overall, and it was vastly more white-collar than Worcester's immigrant population. While most Klan groups were hostile to immigrants in general, the Worcester Klan had great success recruiting among first and second generation Swedish immigrants. The Swedes were among the more established immigrant groups in the city, and the Klan saw Nordic peoples as being a lot better than those dirty mongrels from southern or eastern Europe, and on that basis an alliance was built. By the way, I feel very good that with Benedetti and Melican here, we're representing the Italians and the Irish.
Yeah, no, I think we're covered on this
both
one.
Both of these dirty mongrel people.
Carry on.
Worcester was a very Swedish city. Percentage-wise, it was the second most Swedish large city in the United States, behind Minneapolis. In Kevin Hickey's 1981 paper, The Immigrant Klan, he estimates there were 4,000 Klan members in Greater Worcester in 1924, and that half were Swedish, whereas the city was only 10% Swedish. George N. Jepson, a high-ranking executive who would eventually become president at the Norton Company, one of the city's largest employers, was a big Swedish booster and had been recruiting Swedish employees for decades. So it came to be that 30% of Worcester's Klansmen were Norton-employed Swedes, and 60% of Worcester Klansmen worked at Norton Company. No offense to Swedes or Norton, only like 0.1% of Worcester Swedes were in the KKK. This is one of these statistics that gets confusing. When you say half of KKK members were Swedes, you think, oh, the Swedes were half KKK members? No, not true.
The other half were chefs.
There's no information. I've not found any information about Swedish chefs involved in this, but again, research could go on forever. We could do that next week.
Did you find information on who the other half of...
You mean ethnically? What
or
were
like
the other
what the
groups?
other 40% of non-Norton...
Non-Norton Swedes, where they work? No. I mean, I'm getting this all from one guy's paper. He has a lot of nice columns and things. He's analyzing this based on... So the Klan was super secretive. If you were, even if you were a fairly high-ranking Klans guy, if the newspaper said, "Are you a Klansman?" you would be like, "I don't even know what you're talking about."
This is also another, I think you bring up another giant gaping plot hole that just doesn't stand the test of time, is that things like 23andMe didn't exist back then. So the likelihood none of these people were actually what they thought they were. It's from a genetic perspective or a lineage perspective. Who knows what they were? They're all mongrels.
Well, anyway, the Worcester Klan even went rogue and changed one of the questions on the official KKK membership form from, "Were your parents born in the United States of America?" to, "Are you a Nordic American?" Questions like, "Are you a Gentile or Jew?" "Are you of the white race or a colored race?" and "Do you believe in white supremacy?" remain unchanged. The Central Massachusetts Klan seemed to have started off in outlying areas and then spread to Worcester, where Clarence J. Kearney and Bertram B. Priest were the organizers. Klansmen tried keeping their identities and their meetings secret, always denying involvement if asked by the press, but protests at their events were common. The area around Leominster had it especially bad. At one clash between Klansmen and anti-Klan groups, called Antis in the press, Klansmen opened fire with a couple shotguns, leading to 6 people, including a cop, being shot non-fatally, and 6 arrests from both sides. 2 Catholic schools were burned down. Closer to Worcester, cross burnings were held in many towns, including in front of a Catholic church in Charlton and in front of the Notre Dame convent on Plantation Street in Worcester. One Klan event at Mechanics Hall drew thousands of people on both sides. Maine, as in the state of Maine, KKK head Eugene Farnsworth was the speaker and later bragged he never expected to get out of the city alive. Up to 300 Antis gathered outside the regular Klan meetings at Upton Methodist Church, drawing the notice of state police. How many more minutes we got in this segment? 2 more minutes. I'm going to start this and then we're going to tease it to the break. Unless you have an interruption at this point.
No. By all means.
Okay.
You're interrupting yourself.
And so, Gabrielle, in October 1924, the KKK planned the largest Klan event New England had seen or would ever see. They rented the fairgrounds in Greendale and held a one-day event that drew 9,000 to 15,000 attendees. 1,000 people wore full KKK costumes, and 2,600 people were inducted into the Klan. Now, as a parenthetical, 15,000 people sounds like a lot, but it's worth noting that less than a month before, a garden party fundraiser for Worcester Boy Scout Troop 46 drew around 3,000 people. People were bored in 1924.
It's also worth noting that 9,000 to 15,000 is a fairly broad range.
Well, and this is because initial press estimates were 10 to 15,000, then 15,000, except that the Worcester Evening Post, which was a newspaper for a couple of decades in that time, was like 10,000. Give me a break, guys. So I put 9,000 in here as a tip of the hat, because they don't even say how few they actually think that there were at that. Are we down to a minute?
Or so roughly the attendance of an early start on the street. We can leave it at that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a pretty group.
It's a healthy number of people.
It's a pretty big group of people. Can we go to the break and we'll come back and do some more? All right, this is 508, Worcester's Libertarian Voice. We'll be back in a second with more.
Who was the author you found who had compiled a lot of this? His name is Kevin Hickey. He's an associate professor at Assumption.
Oh, no kidding.
And
Did you reach out to him at all?
I didn't reach out to him. There's so much research that I did left undone for this. And I'm focusing on a 2-hour period in Worcester history.
Yeah.
And it's still infinite research I could be
Well,
doing.
it's fascinating too. Well, you mentioned this was all up in Greendale.
The event was in Greendale.
It was my understanding that the event was actually Mechanics Hall, and that's the way it had been told to me for as long as I've been alive. That's
The
what I found.
previous summer, there was an event at Mechanics Hall.
Oh.
The attendance estimate is about 5,000, but that includes a packed Mechanics Hall plus a couple thousand people. I don't know how many people can go Mechanics Hall.
So very similar to the Scott Brown event back in 2009.
Very serious to the Mr. Hetero competition back in 2007.
Yes, that's right.
Where there's, but that
I forget about Mr. Hetero.
Worcester has always attracted these.
How do we
these things.
attract such loons to this city? Seriously, Worcester, this is your job for the continuance of the Renaissance, right? Is you got to figure out lunatics, like keep them in Holden, Auburn, wherever.
This is something I don't get into here, but Worcester was like the big Klan center of Massachusetts because Boston was hardcore about keeping the Klan out. Like if you were a Klan group and you were renting a hall or you went to rent an office, like a fire inspector or a guy from code would come in and be like, yeah, this is uninhabitable. You guys can't rent this.
No, well, yeah.
Like the city was like spared no sleazy tricks in keeping the Klan out.
And here we are today, where you can't have a Chick-fil-A sandwich in Boston, but here in Worcester, so they're sticking their guns in them.
Are we coming back?
Yeah.
All right.
5, 4, 3, 2.
This is the 508 show. You can call in live at 508-471-5265. Today we've got Brendan Melican and Kayti Burt and me, Mike Benedetti. Now it's time, Brendan.
Now it's time.
Now we're going to get into it. An airplane flew circles over the crowd, decorated with KKK symbols and a glowing red cross of light bulbs underneath the fuselage. One press report described it as like a red ruby in the sky. There was a fireworks show. A national Klan leader spoke against immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and hustled the crowd to buy some $10 KKK memberships. Crowds gathered outside the fences but stayed away from the gates where the Klan had posted guards. As midnight approached, the event ended and people began to drive home. A couple hundred yards from the main gate, some kind of conflict flared up and an anti-Klan mob began throwing rocks through the car windows. Auburn teen Michael Burke was arrested for rock throwing and later fined $25. And the crowd calmed down.
Good on you, Michael Burke.
Well, this is one of these things, as a parenthetical, that I could do infinite research on, which is if I were to go through all of the Worcester suburban directories from the era, I could find out Michael Burke's address. I could find out his father's name and his father's profession, and then I could track that across the years, and I could really probably, even if there's no obit extant of Michael Burke, I could probably tell you exactly his growing up situation and exactly his career situation and his marital situation.
Sure.
I could tell you that in a lot more detail than I know Bit would tell you.
I think this should be a project for somebody to actually track the lineage of all of these folks who were stoning cars in this riot, and we should give them keys to the city. We should have the mayor have a big ceremony, a mass key to the city ceremony for the actions of their great grandparents.
Well, let's wait, Brendan. There's more. I don't know, Katie. You want to flip to the next couple of things? So after Michael Burke was arrested, the crowd calmed down, only to get rowdy again once most Klansmen were gone, flipping one car and setting the fireworks technician's car ablaze. I really love this, by the way. So this is from the Telegram. It says, outbreaks of rioting are in center of city in big letters. And then this other stuff down here, it starts talking about a Klan plane. But here in a little box, Northborough has first snowfall.
Oh, Northborough.
Snow and riots.
Well.
It's central Massachusetts, everybody.
Also, in this article, the word storm is in quotation. The storm.
They're like, people in Northborough thought it was a storm. That's not a storm, buddy. Give me a break. Meanwhile, downtown, things got crazy. Most of the Klansmen were from out of town, so they drove through downtown to get home. Sometime after midnight, 800 antis gathered at Harrington Corner, where Main Street and Pleasant Street meet near City Hall. So as a point of comparison, if you've been at a very large demonstration at City Hall, that's about 2,000 people.
Yeah.
So Harrington Corner, all those streets and side streets were packed with people. They yelled anti-Klan insults at the passing cars, and if anyone yelled back, they threw rocks through their windows. Dozens of men, half a dozen women, and one cop were injured that night. The newspaper noted that occasionally the mob, quote, climbed on the running boards of machines and assaulted the occupants. You can go to the next one, Katie. As well, quote, one victim of the crowd was dragged from his machine on Federal Street and severely beaten by a mob of young men. He left a trail of blood when he made his escape through Allen Court. At one point, 50 antis, quote, commandeered passing automobiles to chase a Klan car down Southbridge Street. It escaped. This commandeering passing automobiles thing, I'm very curious of what this looked like the exact. I assume this is a mass carjacking. 50 dudes doing a carjacking is a pretty intense situation. All this continued for several hours. When the Klansmen figured out that their route home contained a riot, they started leaving via Lincoln Square or Chadwick Square, and part of the mob dashed to these places to harass them. In Lincoln Square, Klansmen Roy Salton and Richard Whitten brandished revolvers and were arrested. The charges were later dropped in court. Also, Whitten identified as a Nova Scotian. Just a little factoid. A couple others were charged with things like disturbing the peace or, in one case, driving at night with no headlights after the mob had ripped out his headlight cables. The debate afterwards was pretty much what you'd expect nowadays after anti-fascist violence. Brendan, the parallels are crazy, including the fact that the anti-Klan people were called antis, not antifas or anti-clus, I guess it would have been, but antis. The newspapers condemned the Klan while spending considerably more ink condemning the antis. There were various arguments about the right to peaceable free speech versus people conspiring to oppress large chunks of the populace. The state Democratic Party had been gleefully condemning the Klan by name, while the Republicans condemned, quote, any organized effort to create racial or religious prejudice, while not naming names. The city council had a bunch of debates in which one councilor said he'd been at Harrington Corner and the mob were not hoodlums. I love the city councilor. City Councilor Donahue.
That was actually City Councilor Rosen in his one of his first terms as Worcester City Councilor.
I wish he was on here right now to talk about this. And the council took a bunch of votes, none of any consequence. A bunch of people blamed Mayor O'Hara, but really what could he have done? His Democratic opponent in the mayoral election said he planned to ban Klan meetings if elected, that he felt his views reflected those of the great Worcesterite and Senator and Republican George Frisbee Hoare, that, quote, the most anti-American thing in America is the Ku Klux Klan, and he lost the election. Klan leaders and their supporters were defiant, with Reverend U.H. Layton of Trowbridge Memorial Methodist Church saying, quote, every stone thrown at the Klansmen will mean 1,000 new members. Burning crosses popped up in the middle of a pond in West Upton and on the hillside behind a GOP parade in Clinton, sparking another little riot. Everybody blamed everybody else for the cross. Klan riots were common nationwide. 2 days after the Worcester riot, Detroit police used tear gas to disperse a crowd of 10,000 Klan sympathizers trying to keep people from attending a talk by the president of the National Anti-Klan Association, who was, weirdly enough, very into white supremacy. One of the more interesting...
Wait, the anti-Klan guy was a white supremacist?
He was a white supremacist. Part of his... He had been an advisor to an Oklahoma governor who had been run out on a rail out of that state for his opposition to the Klan. I have not read any of this guy's books. My rough understanding is that he was like, the KKK is like hassling the black people in the South and the immigrants in the South. And they're just going to go everywhere else and bother us. That we need to shut them down, this KKK thing, which is a really weird argument. But he wrote books. He had an association, and he got 10,000 people to riot against him in Baltimore and Detroit and everywhere else.
A
he
weird
went.
Argument for someone who isn't just like a casual member of this group.
It is. I mean, people were weird. People are weird, and they were weird. One of the more this part I actually like. Can we go to another slide here? We got some pictures of this Klan right behind me. One of the more interesting consequences of the Worcester Klan Meeting and Riot happened in Milford. The driver for the fire department, Adna Hutchins, had long been suspected by other firemen of being a Klansman. There was not much Klan activity in Milford, but they figured he was frequenting the vibrant Klan scene in adjacent Upton. He was spotted at the Worcester rally, and all doubt was removed. At an emergency meeting, the other firemen unanimously demanded Hutchins resign and said they would not ride in any fire truck he was driving. The people in charge of the department subsequently demanded he resign, and when Hutchins refused, he was suspended and they hired a new driver. So the question you ask is, what happened in the interim? In the interim, there was one fire and the chief drove the fire truck. At some point in 1925, the Worcester Klan collapsed. This reflects the nationwide fate of the Second Klan, which, like so many pyramid schemes, boomed before falling apart overnight. You should go back to that headline, I think. The Klan went from 500,000 members in 1921 to 4 million in 1925 to less than 500,000 in 1926 to basically nobody in 1928. Opposition to racist or fascist organizing in Worcester was mostly not riot-based in the following decades. The closest thing to an exception in recent years was when the wannabe Nazi group Noop attended to hold an organizing meeting at the Worcester Public Library in 2011, at which a dozen masked opponents showed up, the MC was brained with a bike lock, and the meeting was then adjourned.
Well done, Mike.
Yeah.
Do we have any more? Whatevers around this?
I don't think so. No, I mean you covered, you destroyed most of the stories that have been told over the years. Some of those photographs are striking. That's good stuff.
Yeah, good job. I mean, good job, Worcester Telegram. And I have to say too, if you've ever done any historical research in Worcester and you've been a little bit frustrated at the fact that when you're looking at the old Worcester Telegram on microfilm, it's kind of like something out of an industrial video with really weird lighting and flickering and lots of scratches. They have this digital microfilm readers now, which are sweet, and that's what I use to capture these.
Do they still have the Worcester, like the sort of local history section up on the third floor?
They do.
It's one of those, I've never looked to see if there's anything collected. You should make a suggestion to the
a collection about what?
A collection about Klan activity.
There is.
There is one. Okay. I never looked to see if they had one.
The library has a section they call the clippings section, which is mostly newspaper stuff, and you can just go up to the third floor of the library and say, "Hey, you got anything in the clippings about the Klan?" And they'll take your ID to make sure that you don't steal their folder, and then they'll give you the folder, and it'll have 50 articles.
Yeah.
A lot of the articles are people rewriting old articles. They're basically everybody's just rewriting Al Southwick's article, including Al Southwick. But I tell you, the librarians of Worcester, Brendan Milliken, whether you go to the Historical Museum in that library or the Worcester Public Library, they are into helping you.
Of course they are.
They are like more into your research than you are. It's always such a pleasure to work with them.
It's because librarians are awesome people.
Yeah, that's been my experience with most librarians.
They are.
I do think it's worth mentioning, too, I don't know if you said this at the beginning, that this article will be in the July edition of Happiness Pony.
That's right. Part of the reason I read this on the air, too, is just to like make sure it flows okay, and also to just like get people's questions and corrections.
It's like doing your own audiobook.
It is like doing our own audiobook. What do we got, a couple minutes left? 2 minutes left.
Was there anything that you found in your research about this that surprised you?
Everything. The fact that it was so much of the same debate around as like the debate around Nazi punching was really interesting to see. The fact that I feel like it's always been told in a way that describes it as basically Worcester kicking out the Klan, which is not what happened. And my first revision of this, before I did a lot of research, I had to say Worcester did not kick out the Klan. And whenever I really did the research and wrote it, it's like obvious that Worcester didn't kick out the Klan. There's no facts that would support that. You don't even have to dismiss that.
The
argument.
thought even sounds absurd running it through my head right now, but that's actually the way it had always been described to me again from like elders who lived in the city. It was that along the lines of some mysterious group of people coming to Worcester to try and spread influence, not for whatever reason, never defined as these were our neighbors, people who lived in the community, who were just kind of doing their regular thing, and it grew and grew and grew until people decided to shut it down a bit.
It did, yeah. I mean, I think that I was surprised at how quickly it flared up, and I was also surprised at how, at least nationally, the Second Klan, was this big organization and did cause lots of problems, and it was named after a terrorist group, which is very weird, and in some ways carried on the traditions of a terrorist group. But like, if you look at the graph of lynchings during the period, it does not coincide with this booming Klan membership. So there's plenty of lynchers in the Second Klan, but they were not able to recruit effectively for lynching using the Second Klan, which I think is a good thing. It makes me feel like we can talk about this with a little more, in a little lighter of a way. Because when we're talking about 4 million Klan members, we're not talking about subsequent 1,000 lynchings a month or whatever.
Sure, right.
And
the whole thing really, I mean, I think it almost begs a degree of levity because it really does seem absurd. I'm fully aware and understand it's an actual part of American history, but it's a patently absurd part of American history.
Well, this is 508, Worcester's Antifa Voice. We're going to be back in a minute with some more information.
I know I've told you this story before, but it's for me it was a very new experience. But I remember going to a mountain bike festival up in Vermont. It's probably almost 20 years ago now, and I was just with a couple friends, and we're camping, right? Whatever. I met a group of dudes who were from somewhere in upstate New York and whatnot. And after a bunch of beers, they started going on this bizarro tirade about their hatred for Germans. And it was like, where they came from, though, was a small town in upstate New York, where there was a German town. And they were just like openly, like, and one of them started the conversation, "Are you Germans?" Or like, and that was like them being comfortable. And it was just, in my head, it was just such a bizarre, whatever. I mean, I guess you hate Germans where they come from, but it was very much like a two sides of the railroad track sort of conversation. And just letting them, all of us from Worcester just had to let them go. This was all just fascinating to us.
I don't know how to cope with anti-German slurs. I was just a little disoriented.
It wasn't like war-based. It wasn't like they were angry. Yeah, it was.
Oh, you know those guys.
It was just weird. Yeah, no, and I just can't wrap my head around. Yeah.
One thing that
I don't know.
You can talk about the whole next segment, by the way. I mean, like, one thing I noticed writing about this. I mean, you were talking before the show about the Worcester Art Museum highlighting which artworks basically were paid for with slave labor.
Mm-hmm.
Not highlighting it, but having that information there.
Yeah.
Doing the perfect balance of just putting the information there, but not in a way that's going to make you think, oh, here's the slave painting, but it's there if you can't care to do any reading of the wall. Like, it's hard to write about people in the past and really like come with a judgment on those people. Like George Frisbee Hoare is a good example, or like the Swedish population of Worcester or whatever. Like, if I want to write bad things about the Swedish population of Worcester in the 20s, I could fill a book with them. I could fill a book with good things about the Swedish population. How do I form a judgment about them? Do I want to form a judgment about them? In some ways, it feels impossible to not.
No, and I guess that's why I always found that conversation I had up in the woods in Vermont interesting.
5, 4, 3, 2.
This is the water, and this is the well.
Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye and dark within. This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eye and dark within. And this is Brendan Melican, the fan favorite. And this is guest Kayti Burt. And this is Michael Benedetti, the one you love to hate on the 508 show. You can call in and talk to us about the old KKK at 508-471-5265. Hi, guys.
How's it going?
Hey.
Okay. Katie, we could talk about WRTA ridership decline, or we could talk about literally anything else.
Let's talk about anything else.
What else is going on in Worcester this week besides me being
Your
at the
ridership
library?
is down on the WRTA.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a bunch of stuff going on this week, but it's just like kind of like the Worcester Renaissance stuff. It's stuff that like it's important stuff. It's stuff that we shouldn't retcon out of existence. The fight to save Notre Dame, blah blah blah. But it's like there's nothing in that plot this week. We don't need to have it on this week's show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you're not as into this, but I have been watching a lot of World Cup games.
Saw you down at the Boynton yesterday
yeah.
watching. Yeah.
Out and about.
Who's watching World Cup games in the bars of Worcester?
I
Pretty
mean,
much everybody.
Yeah. At the Boynton, I think it's a different, group of people than I know they had a viewing party at El Patron when Mexico was playing that I didn't get to go to.
I've been surprised though how many. I guess I'm outing myself for spending too much time at the bar at the Boynton, but I've been surprised at how many people every day see down
Yeah.
there and totally into it, which
especially
is
since
kind of cool.
all of the games are during the day.
Yeah. But no, it's a
Yeah.
lot of interest, Mike.
Whenever the World Cup happens, because I was in Worcester the last time as well and would go to like Sahara, and I don't think I went to the Boynton, but it makes me wish that sort of like local pub culture or whatever it is, like communities forming around something like a sporting event happen more often, because it feels very like non-American. I mean, other than like obviously like the Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah. But that's a very different vibe.
One of the things to touch on one of these facts from this article, the idea that like, okay, you could get 15,000 people to come out for the opening of an envelope in 1924. Like, it does feel like the Worcester today is a Worcester where there's less people going out of the house, going to the third places of Worcester.
Sure.
Is that true? Is this an accurate assessment, Brendan?
It depends. I think it depends kind of on the demographic you're talking about.
Okay.
I think a lot of younger cats are definitely sort of reinventing what it means to be or have a third place in all sorts of ways. For whatever reason,
Tell me more about that.
no.
Okay. Okay.
I just totally made that up. No. I because I think there was a significant decline. Like even if you talk to people that work in like the restaurant bar industry and whatnot, like I think you'd find a common acceptance that the sort of concepts that would work for say a bar have had to change over the years. It's like it can't just be a bar; it needs to have some sort of food attached to it or some sort of entertainment or whatnot. That sort of constant evolving just to keep the current audience attracted. I tend to see a lot more younger cats just in and about the city, a lot of whom are new to the city and more willing to explore the city than I still find for middle-aged folks who are lifers here that I grew up with.
And even for young people, like there's such a class barrier to those spaces too. Like I spend a lot of time at the bean counter because that's where I do my work from my computer. But it's people who can afford to, get like a $5 coffee or whatever on a daily basis versus, when you go to Elm Park and who's there hanging out during the summer when it's nice. And I don't know a lot of like indoor spaces where can be your third space and that are like economically kind.
But to that point too, like I mean, I've got I'm aware of a group of younger people all hovering around the age of 21 who like their nighttime jam on the weekends is like running around like crazy people playing tag and other stuff down at Elm Park, like totally co-opting spaces and whatnot, doing some really fun stuff that reminds me of what my friends used to do in various ways 25 years ago. Kind of cool to see, because I think we did lose a little bit of that, and I think ultimately that was your point. If you or I are going to be more likely to run into people who are our own age in the city, then there probably is a little bit of being out and just being a part of spaces.
Yeah, like there's not like on the other hand, I feel like there probably are exactly the kind of spaces that we're talking about. We just don't know about them. For such is the nature of Worcester. There's probably a bar called Mike and Brendan's 40-year-old hangout bar, and we're just not aware of it.
Yeah, no, but I think
one day you'll find it.
I'm sure it exists right now in the city. It's probably around the block from my house. I just never go over there.
I think there is something to be said too about changes in the way interpersonal communication works and impacts that as well. Like you don't need to guess where your friends are, right? Like again, 20 years ago, if I wanted to find friends, there were like 3 neighborhoods in the city that I had to go to. If you go back 30 years, there was like 4 houses within one general neighborhood that I had to check out to see if I could find my friends. Like there, You couldn't just pull out your phone and see where people were taking pictures on Snapchat or whatnot. It's it's less of a process to actually discover people, so you're less likely, I think, to need to actually go to places to discover.
I still love that feeling though when you organically run into someone is so nice.
I still, out of habit, I really only go out by myself with the assumption that eventually I'm going to run into somebody I know.
Yes.
And if it takes a while to get there, like I don't posse up with a bunch of friends like to go somewhere. Just if the roster of places that I enjoy, I know if I cycle through them on a long enough period of time, I'm going to run into some people. But I think that's kind of a dated way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I think about moving out of Worcester, like not to like Holden, but like a long way away. I think about that all the time, but I realized like I would never have that running into people experience anywhere else that I moved. It would take forever to develop that again.
Yeah.
And I've lived in a lot of cities for a lot of years around the country, and like there's never been another city where I've gotten to that point. I think even on the early days of this show, I had not gotten to the point where if I go out and I walk a mile down the street in Worcester, probably going to see at least one person that I know and say hi.
Which is, again, what I think is really cool about World Cup, and maybe sports in general, but something about the World Cup, that watching people viewing it publicly, and this isn't the only year that we've seen this. I mean, people get into it every year, obviously. More, it seems in increasing numbers. It seems to rekindle that kind of lost idea of just talking to the stranger next to you. Like you both are staring at a TV over a beer or something, and now you're having a conversation with a stranger. And that's something I hugely miss, because I think it's nearly terrifying, bordering on dangerous, to have normal conversations like all the things our grandmothers told us not to discuss in public, like politics and religion, the stuff that I just grew up having conversations with strangers about. You kind of can't do that anymore. It's going to end up in a fist fight.
Yeah, that's what popular culture's for.
Yeah, but
you just be like, hey, have you seen The Wire? If they say yes, you can talk all the day long. And if they say
That's the
no, you're
opening
just
I
like,
need.
who's the next person?
yeah.
Who else is in this bar?
Who else is in the bar?
WRTA ridership is down 13% for the last year, I think, which is more than the national average by far, and more than the state average, and more than other RTAs in the state.
WRTA leadership is down 100%.
The WRTA guy has decided to resign and get a job, which is not terrible. There's this Telegram and Gazette article. This is what I suggest you do: is you read Cyrus Moulton's article in the Telegram and Gazette, because he's quoting all of these national transit database numbers that I cannot find anywhere online. So he has access to these statistics, so he can tell us about this. But I wish I had more. I wish I could dig into this more and tell you more about like what it was maybe around Worcester. Like, what were we do? One thing is that last year we actually cut service for the first time in a while.
Sure.
So versus a RTA that doesn't cut service, we're going to have a bigger drop. Like, come on. Like, that's how it works.
If I close the store for the rest of the day, sales are in fact going to be down.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I mean, this is just more bad news about the WRTA, basically.
No, you convinced me weeks ago that we don't need it anymore, so I'm
we definitely,
I'm fine with this.
I think we need it. What did I say we need to do instead?
Well, in its current form, that we just need to figure out a more meaningful way to move people around. I think barring the idea that it's probably a stupid idea, but the idea that I've always thrown around to start repurposing public transportation for students, how are you ever going to find a degree of ridership that would increase in a way that would provide revenue if the majority of people who are moving themselves in non-owned vehicles are using services like Lyft and Uber? It doesn't make sense.
I'm going to keep saying that mass transit is a 20th century technology because I feel like it makes me sound very wise.
Yeah.
Like I've done a lot of thinking about this issue, so that's going to continue to be my kind of gnomic.
And I think you're right. It's dying on the vine, Mike. That's it.
Have you guys been on the WRTA in the past year?
Yes. Have I been on the WRTA in the past week? Yes. Something that I realized. How many minutes do we have left? Like 1 minute?
We were done like 10 minutes ago. We're just talking to ourselves now.
So, I mean, something that I realized the last time I was on the bus is that whenever I take a bus route that I've taken before, almost always goes very smooth. Whenever I take a bus route that I haven't taken before or don't take hardly ever, half the time it goes wrong. I don't think that's an exaggeration. Half the time I get on the wrong bus, one of the things, I start heading the wrong direction, I can't figure out where the bus stop is. And so, like, I just throw that out there to say, like, it kind of reminds me of the experience of a first-timer using the WRTA, that, like, it's a very good and professional and, state-of-the-art bus system in a lot of ways, but it's still, even for somebody who actually rides it, still can be very disorienting and confusing. I mean, and this is like if I sat down and was like really awake and really like doing, this would be fine. But this is like with me using Google Maps and writing notes and whatever, and just kind of being a little tired that day or whatever.
That's what I was just going to ask you. Do you are you aware how good of a job the WRTA has been doing in keeping data uploaded to Google for use?
Good.
Very good. Okay. Cool.
Good. Very good.
Just
yeah.
in terms of cuts and rescheduling and whatnot.
Very good. Yeah. I mean, you should use if you wonder about. I mean, there's a mass transit option in Google Maps if people haven't used it. And whenever next time you're going to go someplace in Worcester, just click the little bus icon, see what it says, and try that, and see. There's your experience. Then whenever somebody says, "Have you ridden the bus in the last year?" you can say, "Oh, yes, I have."
I would also suggest
I'm a man of the
if
world.
you're walking anywhere in Worcester, even if you know where you're going, pull out your phone, pull up Google Maps, and check the walking option because they always find the coolest shortcuts, and you're going to end up going places that you never knew existed. I use it all the time just to find myself lost, and it's pretty fantastic.
Well, this is 508. This has been 508, Worcester's Libertarian Voice. I just want to mention also that this show is broadcasting with 100 milliwatts of power on 102.9 FM. It's streaming at worcestermag.com and at unityradioma.org. This show is also cablecast on WCCA TV 194, podcasted at pieandcoffee.org, live streamed to our Facebook page, where 3 people have been watching this nonsense today.
Sorry about that, guys.
You can't call in live anymore, but we still thank Gabrielle Powers. How's your week been going?
It's been good.
Are you loving Worcester?
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. All right, everybody. We will see you all next week on the 508 show. Bye-bye.